The cocktail is an American drink. From an historical standpoint, one thing we do have is what we believe is the very first manual for bartenders. Here's a copy of a second edition of that manual. The second edition was printed in 1876. It's by Jerry Thomas, also called Professor Jerry Thomas. The first edition was printed in 1862. And it's not just a cocktail manual, it's actually a manual for bartenders including various mixed drinks. The total number of recipes is over 200. For cocktails, however, there are only 10. 10 cocktail recipes. Imagine today we have what you might consider thousands of cocktail recipes out there, or thousands of drinks that you think are cocktails. So what then is a cocktail? In 1806, we have a reference printed in the Balance of New Columbian Repository from the New England states, a reference where an editor has to define what a cocktail is to one of his readers. He defines it thusly: spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters. It's important to understand the bitters in there, because he also called it a bittered sling, referencing a drink that predates the cocktail, the sling, which was just basically spirits of any kind, sugar, and water. The bitters is what makes the drink. In essence, without bitters, it's not a cocktail. And for almost 100 years, that was the case. Now, when I talk about this old book, they're hard to find and expensive. Every once in a while you find them on eBay, or you can find them on some of these used books websites and stuff like that. Fortunately, we do have a company that has recently published a reprint edition. It's virtually identical to the original 1862 edition of it, but costs far less. We'll make sure that on the Small Screen Network website, we stick a link to where you can pick up one of these copies if you want it. Now, when talking about the cocktail and what is a cocktail, let me just look through a couple of the recipes in here that he called a cocktail recipe. He talks about the brandy cocktail, the fancy brandy cocktail, the whiskey cocktail, the champagne cocktail, the gin cocktail, the fancy gin cocktail. Each one of these essentially was a spirit, a sweetening agent, ice, and bitters. That creates the concept of cocktail. Spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters. Now, what made a fancy cocktail rather than just simply a regular cocktail was you would take a piece of lime peel and rub it along the edge of the glass, making it just a little bit fancier. Today, that's common practice when most bartenders make any type of cocktail or most mixed drinks. But let's get back to the champagne cocktail. The recipe he quotes for the champagne cocktail is a half teaspoonful of sugar, 1 or 2 dashes of bitters, a piece of lemon peel. Fill a tumbler 1/3 full of broken ice and fill the balance with wine, in which case he was meaning champagne. Shake well and serve. Now, shaking champagne is not something I recommend unless it had gotten flat, and maybe he was using flat champagne when he made his champagne cocktails. But what I'd like to do right now is make you a champagne cocktail, showing you how simple and easy it is to make a cocktail that dates back over 200 years. We, of course, start out with champagne. The last time I did this on camera, it blew up all over on me, so we'll be a little careful this time. Champagne, of course, comes from France. If it didn't come from France, it has to be called sparkling wine. One of the stories about the origins of champagne say that Dom Perignon invented champagne or discovered the process or whatever. That's not actually true. They were making champagne for many, many years before that. What Dom Perignon did is he basically came up with the whole package, a bottle that would not break, the cork that was able to be pulled out of it. Prior to this, bottles would be constantly breaking. The champagne bottle is actually a very interesting bottle because it's extremely heavy, but it's made in 3 pieces. You have the 2 sides of the champagne bottle, and then this top piece here is actually a second piece that is part of the process of making sure it doesn't break. That is why you can see people doing the sabering thing where they'll take a sword and pop off the top of the bottle. Really what they're doing is cracking off the piece right on the top here and taking advantage of the fact that this top piece is a separate piece entirely. I'm not going to do it here because I'm indoors It's something you want to make sure you do outdoors with experience and not pointing any place you're gonna hit anybody with the cork. So let's see what sort of mess I make here. So to make a champagne cocktail, you start with a champagne glass. You take the champagne and gently pour it into the glass. Then to add the sugar and the bitters, the way I do it is I simply take Angostura bitters, take a sugar cube, put it on the top of the bitters bottle, hold it thusly, and invert it to allow the bitters to soak into the cube a little bit. Then you take the cube, drop it in the champagne. For the garnish, I use a lemon twist, using a channel knife, taking a fresh lemon. If you let a lemon get old, the twist eventually is very hard to get off of it. You'll notice I'm doing this over the glass, pointing the peel at the glass as I'm doing it. What this does is takes all the oils that are being expressed out of the peel and putting them on top of the drink. Essentially making this very similar to what Jerry Thomas would have called a fancy cocktail. So we can call this a fancy champagne cocktail. I'm now taking a stir rod and taking lemon peel and twisting it around the stir rod. I'll end up with a nice spiral. And there we have the champagne cocktail.